are we potentially at that end of the road where we either have to let the malinvestment clear naturally, which is a very painful deflationary event, or the Federal Reserve and the other central banks just say, well, we got to turn the printers up to infinity, and we're not going to let that happen, but we're just sadly going to have to kill our currencies in the process. And then the following question is should we be picking one of those paths? Like if Stephanie Pomboy were made empress tomorrow, would you just say it's time for us to take the pain? Yes, it's going to be an awful couple of years, but we'll emerge from the rubble. The sun will still shine, and we can have a much better system at that point in time. What do you think?
Well, I do have a weakness for the Austrian approach of, let's just let the system clear itself. And, I hate to be like a whiner from the peanut gallery, but had we done that in 1999, 2000 with the dot-com, or even 2008, we wouldn't be in the situation where the stakes were as high as they are today. But at every turn, the Fed has decided to take the path of no pain and just numb the problem by inflating a new bubble. And the fiscal policymakers obviously aren't blameless in this either. So when it comes down to having policymakers, whether it's monetary or fiscal, choose the hard path, I just don't see it happening. I'd like to think if I were Empress, I'd say, we're going to do nothing. This is going to be awful. But ultimately, hopefully it'll be awful for a short period of time, and we'll come out the other end really in a great position. But I just honestly, I don't think there's any chance of that happening, which is why I alluded to the new monetary regime, because I just think the obvious conclusion is going to be that they're going to have to reverse all of the restraint now that they're attempting to impose, and they're going to have to open the monetary floodgates, and it will destroy the value of all the world's major reserve currencies, the dollar, pound, euro, yen, etc., to the point that finally we have to come up with some new monetary regime, because our creditors just say, that's it, you've silently defaulted on our loans to you long enough. We're not going to take it anymore.
Gosh, what's so interesting about this, Stephanie, is we are beginning to enter the period of the timeline, I believe, where a lot of the things that we have talked about over the years are transitioning from becoming sort of academic discussions to becoming, practical observations of what's happening in the real world.
Right? I describe it as moving from lunatic fringe, sandwich board toting lunatic on the corner screaming about the apocalypse, to suddenly being acceptable, polite conversation. is what's happened, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think, and I mean, look, we're not quite there yet, but yes, it's amazing how much kind of just the mainstream analysts and media folks are talking about this have shifted just since January, in terms of their at least willingness to consider that everything isn't always awesome all the time right now, or there may be things to be concerned about. But the point I was sort of making is, and this is really why I'm digging so hard with you into, do we think that we're heading into recession here, is because, again, I think it's becoming less of a talk about what may happen, and we're actually beginning to see it start to happen. And so I want to make sure that people are recognizing this so that they can take whatever prudent steps in their life that they think are going to best position themselves for what's coming. And personally, as I try to tell folks here, I don't think inaction or denial is a good strategy at this point. I see you sort of nodding as I'm saying this.
I've sort of built my business around trying to identify the unseen risks that aren't being priced into the market that I think people should be focused on. And what I've discovered is that I find it intellectually very stimulating, and I think it's always good to know what could go wrong, so that you're, to be forearmed is to be, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. But what you learn is how little appetite there is to hear anything negative. People don't want to hear that. Even if it's something just for information, like good to know that this could happen. It might not, but at least I can be prepared. But there really isn't a lot of appetite for that. And so you're in this business, you're sort of incentivized to come up with the rosy scenarios, and then everyone is kind of trying to one up themselves on who can have the rosiest scenario. And so that's, I think, part of the issue. And maybe it also feeds into this question of, or the reason why the sentiment can shift so quickly, so dramatically, when you can go from, yay, we're having hyperinflation, and then the next minute we're going off the cliff like Thelma and Louise, and people, suddenly have to completely shift their thinking just because they've been so trained for so long to only see one direction.
Yeah, you said two things there I think are important. One is there's that great cartoon where the two guys are sitting at a desk and one guy says an inconvenient truths, and there's nobody at his desk, and the other guy's desk says comforting lies, and there's a huge line there, right? I think just humans being humans, they like to hear good news. But you're reminding me about a video that I put out right at the beginning of this year that, now that I'm reflecting on it, was maybe a little more prescient than I even realized at the time, called "Don't Be a Deer in the Headlights." It's a very short video. I'll put up a link to it here. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because things can shift so quickly here, and we see tougher times ahead as being more likely. Another very human reaction is to just become immobilized when you get caught by surprise by this stuff. And if you don't have a plan in place, if you haven't prepared for it, you can really get stuck in that fear, right? Fear and denial. And then, when things unwind, they tend to unwind a lot faster than they built up. And by the time you finally get kicking into action, well, you may have missed the opportunity to move yourself to safety, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It might be time to buy by the time you figured out how, what to sell and get out of.
Yeah. So all I'm trying to underscore here, and feel free to put any bow on top of this as we wrap up here, but it's just that this really is the time for people to be getting serious about, okay, if some of the things that Stephanie talked about actually happened over the next 12 months, what can I be doing today to put myself in a better position than I might be in right now, should that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, just looking at the sentiment number that we got today and the CPI, both signal that we may very well be in recession right now while we're talking. You've never seen consumer sentiment at those levels and not been in recession. And, the same is true with gasoline prices or oil prices. Whenever they spike up at this magnitude, you've generally been on the eve of a recession.
Yeah.
And then when you look at things like the run up in credit card borrowing alongside a slowdown in discretionary spending, that's generally been a leading indicator of recession. There are a lot of warning flags that we are in or soon headed into a recession. And the Atlanta Fed, their latest forecast for the second quarter is 0.9, which within the next couple weeks before the quarter ends could very well make its way to zero. So we're really within razor thin margins of getting into the technical definition.
Right. And if that were to happen, then that would be 2 quarters back to back of negative GDP, which by many people's description is technically a recession. And even if it comes in, it stays positive at positive 0.9. We were negative 1.5 in Q1. So we have net contracted in the first half of 2022. We didn't even get into jobs really much, the outlook for jobs. I've mentioned the word layoffs a number of times, and that's been really big on my mind. Like I said, I put some recent videos out about that. But everything we're talking about here just gets even worse, right? If people start losing their jobs, if we have millions of layoffs again.